Hello, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of EKU Voices, a conversation with Eastern Kentucky University's alumni and friends, brought to you by the Office of Development and Alumni Relations in collaboration with the Department of Communication. I'm Carrie Lewis, Director of Special Projects and Development.
And I'm Brady McBride, a senior here at EKU.
And we are bringing you this podcast from the Department of Communication podcast studio on the Campus Beautiful here in Richmond, Kentucky. So, Brady, how's it going today?
It's going great.
No, it's October.
It is.
It's 80 degrees.
Thank God. I love it when it's warm. I mean, I'll take warm weather over cold any day as long as it just keeps... It just has to not rain.
I totally agree. And I actually like the warm fall days.
I do too.
There's just something like about it where, you know, like the leaves are changing, but it's still 80 degrees out. And I don't know. I like it. I like it.
It's a fummer day.
Yes, it is a fummer day. And as anybody who has listened to this podcast in the last year knows, I despise the cold. So I am super, super on board with this late summer, whatever
Definitely.
you want to call it, that we're having. And yes, it is not raining.
Thank God.
That's always a plus. And of course, October, fall break is coming.
Another great reason for fall.
Another bonus, right?
Yep.
Are you ready?
Oh yeah.
I'm so ready. I mean, I don't know how the students think, but in my mind, you know, as an employee of the university, I tend to think in chunks of time, right? So we hit the beginning of the semester, then you hit Labor Day, then fall break. That pushes right into Thanksgiving and right on into Christmas.
Exactly.
so yeah, that's kind of how my mind. That's where I'm at right now. So I'm definitely ready for fall break. Also, of course, we had to do our Purdy's thing,
obviously,
to get ready for this episode. And you know, I went with the black coffee, cinnamon raisin bagel this time.
Hey. What was your story you had behind that?
Yeah, I had to have the cinnamon raisin bagel just on purpose. So I have this friend who lives in New York, and I'll just tell this story really quickly. But I have this friend who lives in New York, and back a month ago or so, Cynthia Nixon, who was running against Mario Cuomo for the Democratic nomination for the New York governor in the primary, went to a deli and ordered a cinnamon raisin bagel with lox, which is smoked salmon, capers, pickled onions, and cream cheese.
It's a very odd,
Yes. And my friend in New York was appalled. So we kind of had this running joke about cinnamon raisin bagels. So I had to get a cinnamon raisin bagel, take a picture, and send it to her. But I said cream cheese only.
Very true.
Absolutely.
The lox would have been a little too much.
It would have been way too much. And even
especially at Purdy's.
Yes. Even I couldn't do that.
Yep.
So on the way over here today, I had to cheat on Purdy's a little bit, and I had to stop at Java City and get a small coffee because
always a classic.
Yeah, I was dragging. And Java City is in our beautiful library, which is it's a great space.
It is,
and not bad coffee, not too bad.
Pretty good.
So here we are.
Yep.
All right. So I think I'm ready. I'm ready to introduce the guest.
Let's do it.
First of all, I have to thank Dean of Students Kenna Middleton for coming on our last episode. It was a great conversation.
Oh, it was.
A lot of great stories. Please definitely go listen to that episode. She was absolutely great. Loved having her. But I'm pretty excited about this guest this week because, again, it is October and we're getting in that spooky Halloween season, right? So I think this is going to be a fun conversation to get that started. So our guest in this episode is an EKU alum, a senior lecturer in the EKU Department of English, and a published author. A native of Richmond, Kentucky, he earned a Bachelor of Arts in English from Berea College and a master's degree in English from EKU. He's been an instructor at EKU since 1989, teaching composition and literature on both the main campus and on EKU's regional campuses in Corbin and Manchester. With an interest in history, true crime, natural disasters, folklore, and ghostlore, he has authored and published over 14 books on these subjects in Kentucky and the United States, including Cassius Clay, Freedom's Champion, Offbeat Kentuckians, Murder in Old Kentucky, The Kentucky Book of the Dead, Strange Tales of Crime and Murder in Southern Indiana, The Great Louisville Tornado of 1890, Gothic and Strange True Tales of the South, Creepy California, and his newest book, New England Nightmares, True Tales of the Strange and Gothic. When he's not teaching, researching, or writing, you can find him working on perfecting his vocal impersonation of Droopy Dog, which I am hoping he does for us on this podcast. Please welcome Keven McQueen.
Hello, thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you.
Oh, yeah.
So you really want to hear Droopy, do you?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. If you want to do it right off, go.
All
Go
right,
for
sure. Because I'll forget if I don't do it now.
Okay.
All right, here goes.
Okay.
Hello, all you happy people at EKU. How are you this evening? I'm very, very happy.
That's really good.
It's really good.
That's really, really
awesome.
good.
Well, I practice that in my office when I'm not building forts out of old folders.
And I mean, you got the face down and everything. You got
Thank
you got the whole deal. No, that's really good. I like that. Well, I think we're done. All right. So
You
thank
can't
you very
top
much.
that.
You can't top that.
Droopy.
No. But we're really excited to have you here. That's only a smattering of the titles that I've read that you've written. About all kinds of different true crime and offbeat subjects and ghost lore and folklore, which we're really excited to get into talking to you about here in a few minutes. But I got to ask you, are you a coffee guy?
I'm more of a Mountain Dew guy.
Okay.
I'm all hopped up on Mountain Dew even as we speak.
All right. That's fair. That's
Yeah.
a drink of choice around here.
Well, it is for me, certainly.
Yeah, students like it. I know
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Definitely. Brady, you a Mountain Dew guy?
I like the Baja Blast and Diet Mountain Dew. I usually don't get the regular stuff. I'm not a big soda guy.
Not a big soda guy. I'm not a huge soda Coke person either, but every once in a while I'm like, yeah, okay, I can deal with some Mountain Dew.
Yeah.
I can do that. If you need that real super pick me up,
It keeps me alive
right?
from falling asleep, on the sidewalk.
Absolutely. That definitely will cast out your droopy dog for
That's
sure.
true. Yeah.
But no, so Kevin, you are a native of Richmond, Kentucky.
Yes.
And so you've been around here for a while, a little bit.
Quite a while. I was born in Richmond, and my family lived here till I was about 7. And then the big tornado of 1974 scared us away, and we moved to Jackson County, where I went to high school. Then I came back to Madison County to attend Berea College.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So the tornado of 1974, I was actually not born then. And Brady, I know you weren't
I
either.
definitely was not.
So, what were you all in the middle of that?
Well, it passed within about 200 yards of our house, and it
Wow.
killed some people who lived a little distance behind us.
So did you all move to Jackson to kind of get away from that weather pattern?
I think so. It was so close to the house that it was really quite traumatic. It happened in April, and I think by the summertime we had already left.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. So how much had Richmond changed when you came back?
Oh, an awful lot. I have a really neat old picture showing the bypass as it was in 1974, and it's nearly unrecognizable.
It was all farmland up until probably, well, I mean, the other side of the interstate that the bypass is, it was all farmland, probably up until the center was built.
Because when did they finish the bypass?
I'm not really sure. The one I'm thinking about, the one that's really close to Eastern, as far as I know, it's been there for decades and decades. But the newer bypass is definitely, I think, less than 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So you ended up going to Berea College. What kind of prompted that decision instead of getting out of Richmond or the Eastern Kentucky area?
Well, I just always heard many nice things about Berea College, that it was a pretty difficult school, which in fact it is. Also, I had no car, and it's a college that kind of caters to people who don't have cars.
That's true.
This is definitely true.
A lot of walking distance.
So what was your interest in majoring in English there?
Well, I always had an interest in English, an interest in writing. There are just certain things that you're just good at right from childhood, and that was one of them.
You were a part of the theater department, weren't you? Was that just here at Eastern, or was that also at Berea?
Oh no, I was never part of the theater
You weren't?
department.
Okay.
Well, then
Never taught theater.
we looked at some wrong information.
must
Then
have.
the internet steered us wrong.
Oh
on that.
really? What did they say?
Yeah. I can't remember where I read it, but it said that you had taught in theater, had been involved in theater, I think.
Oh. Well, it was the English and theater department.
Okay,
Okay,
maybe
that's
that's
Probably what it was. People were just assuming, well, he teaches English, he must teach theater
That
too.
might
But I
be it.
never have.
Okay.
Okay.
You just always had an interest in writing,
Yes.
never acting.
Oh, I'd be the worst actor in the world.
I don't know, man. The droopy
droopy
dog
was
was pretty good.
Well, maybe a voice actor.
acting, yeah.
Okay, there you go, voice
It's
actor.
always been my secret dream.
Yeah. So, kind of in your time at Berea, did you start writing books, or were you kind of just finding yourself?
Just finding myself. They kept us so busy there that most writing was strictly done for school reasons.
So no self-published works that are hanging around out there?
Not until 2001.
And 2001 was the tornado, Louisville tornado?
Oh, no, that was my first book came out that year, and that was the book about Cassius Clay, the
okay.
Emancipator.
Yeah, I got you.
Which we're going to get to in just
Okay.
a second.
Yeah.
So you graduate from Berea, and then did you knew you wanted to get your master's, or did what did you want to do?
Well, I had an idea that I wanted to teach film classes, and I thought, well, it's hard to get a job teaching strictly film classes, but you can teach English and film classes, so I'll just get a master's in English. I never did end up teaching film classes, but I'm really happy teaching English.
Okay.
So what was your interest in film?
I had a teacher named Richard Sears at Berea College who taught film classes, the history of narrative film. And he just made the subject so interesting to me. And I always had an interest in old movies, back in the days when you couldn't easily see them if you wanted to. Now with the video revolution and all these cable channels that show old movies, it's not so hard finding one. But at the time, about the only time you could really see an old classic film, around here anyway, was in a film class.
That's definitely true. They had some theaters in Richmond. I've seen old advertisements for the theaters in Richmond. I want to say that a couple of them actually showed some classic films.
I think they did. I know down at the mall, I don't know if they're still doing it, but for a while Turner Classic Movies was releasing classic films.
But that's been, I guess, early. That's been later than the time period that you're referring to. Did you have any interest in documentary film making?
Oh, definitely. I love documentaries.
Just because, I mean, your writing seems to want to lend itself maybe a little bit to that kind of thing.
I think you're right. Most of it, well, all of it really is fact-based. I've just never had a terribly good imagination. I'm not good at making up characters or dialogue, so anything that I write has to be based on something that's actually happened.
So what made you decide to come to Eastern to get your master's degree?
Well, Eastern was close to Berea, and as I mentioned, I had no car at the time and couldn't drive, so that was part of it. But also, both of my parents went to school at Eastern.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So they're both alums then?
Yes, and also my stepmother, so there was sort of a family tradition of coming here.
And see, that harkens back to
all the way back to me over
here.
And I mean, Eastern's a lot of people that come here. It's a family tradition, really.
It seems like it. That's a callback to a lot of our guests seem to have some kind of legacy to Eastern, and then that's, it's just kind of a family tradition, I guess.
Well, I'm not surprised. It really caters to the people of a particular region, and it's sort of passed down that this is the place to go to get a good education.
Yeah, absolutely, and I don't think myself or Brady would necessarily disagree with that statement.
Not at all.
Not at all. So you come here and you get your master's in English, and did you think about going anywhere else to teach?
Not really. I just sort of have a tendency to stay where I'm put. So very briefly, I moved to Missouri to take journalism classes, but that was less than a year, and I was back at Eastern teaching.
No interest in journalism?
Well, it was just too expensive.
Okay.
I couldn't afford it.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm. So you ended up at Eastern teaching, and you actually teach or taught more on the satellite campuses, because we do have some satellite campuses, right, in Corbin and Manchester, and there's also one in Hazard, but you said you have not taught at the Hazard campus.
No, I haven't been to Hazard. I taught at Danville quite a lot when we still had the Danville campus.
Yeah, so we used to have a campus in Danville, but yeah, we do have the Corbin and Manchester campuses. So what kind of drew you to teaching on the satellite campuses as opposed, and you teach on the main campus, but I think you seem to be, from what I've read, more drawn to teaching on the satellite campuses.
It really kind of was an accident at first. I was just asked if I would teach at the Corbin campus, and I found that, it was Manchester. And I enjoyed it so much that I just kept requesting to go back. And I still do. I think the students at the satellite campuses are really outstanding. They're very serious about their classes, generally speaking, and they really, really come from family traditions of going to Eastern.
And definitely a lot of first-gen students.
And a lot of non-traditional students. I have a lot of students who are middle-aged, who've never been to college, and it's very convenient for them to go somewhere local rather than come all the way to Richmond. So I'm very pleased to teach off campus.
Yeah, absolutely. So what kind of classes are you teaching?
I teach composition and literature, world literature.
How does your teaching? You were a tour guide at Whitehall for a while, right?
Yes, actually for several years.
Okay, how does that like connect with your teaching? Does it like? I mean, I'm sure you're giving like a tour guide group. Basically, you're giving them a lecture on like the house, right?
It's kind of like, being a history teacher. History being, other than English, the topic I was most interested in when I was a student.
Do you bring any of your books into your classroom?
No, I don't actually. Every now and then a student will look me up online and find I've written something, but generally speaking, I don't mention those in class.
Oh, that's interesting. So in terms of like your students, how receptive are they to writing literature, that kind of thing?
Most of them actually seem to be, they tend to get into it, I think. I'm a good audience for them, I think. I'm pretty supportive, and a lot of them find they have talent that they didn't really even know that they had.
When did you find out that you had a talent for writing?
Well, even as a child, I wrote. It's really strange. In those days, I actually did write stories that I would make up, but I found out pretty quickly that I simply wasn't very good at it, and I started writing more fact-based material. And that's pretty well what I've stuck with.
Mm-hmm. Well, your brother's an author, or a illustrator, my bad. You're the author.
Yes, he illustrates. He can write a lot, too.
Okay.
But I don't think he's had any writings published, but he has illustrated a number of books.
And
some of mine and
you're
others
twins,
as well.
You're twins, too, correct?
Yes, we are. In fact, he works at the Crab Library, and whenever I have a Richmond class, I always have to warn students on the first day that I have a twin, and if they see what they think is me in the library, that it may not necessarily be me. And I think they always think I'm kidding until they run into him.
And his name's Kyle, right?
Kyle, yes.
Kyle, yeah. And he's done illustrations for a lot of your books.
A lot of mine, and he's done a number. He's done Christmas cards as well, and a lot of books for Arcadia Press.
Interesting. So you were a tour guide at Whitehall from 1995 to 2001?
I think so. That sounds right. It was a number of years.
Yeah, it was a number of years. So let's talk a little bit about that. So Whitehall it's a big house here in Richmond. It's a big historic house here in the Richmond area. And it was the home of Cassius Clay, who before we started recording, I think there was a little bit of confusion on my part, but he's definitely related to Henry Clay.
Yes, if I remember correctly, he was a third cousin.
And it was his house. He lived there. So tell us a little bit more about that whole experience and kind of how that led you to writing your first book.
Well, I enjoyed working there a lot. For one thing, I got to wear a really cool 19th century costume that I miss, and I wish I could still wear it. But also you meet a lot of very interesting people from all over the world there, and it's a chance to talk to them about history, one of the lesser-known figures of history, but he really should be a lot more famous than he is. The original house was built in 1798 by his father, and then in the 1860s, he and his wife, or Cassius and his wife, had the house expanded. And I did work there for a number of years. And it really got me started as an author because I noticed that people were telling me stories about Clay that weren't in print, especially relatives of his. And I kept seeing all these old newspaper clippings with stories about him that had never been in print. And I found that the most recent book about him had been 10, 15 years old. And so I thought I would write a new book about him, and I did. And it was published by Turner Publishing. And that sort of snowballed into other books.
Cassius Clay being one of Richmond's prominent figures, do you have any favorite stories or facts that people might not know about him?
Oh, there's so many good stories about him. He was constantly in fights.
Those make for good stories usually.
Oh, yes,
Absolutely. Yeah, we did. I mean, if you would like to tell a couple, we'd definitely like to hear them.
Well, I haven't done any tour guiding in a long, long time. Let's see if I can remember
Put
any
you on the
good ones off
spot
the
here.
top of my... Well, one of the better stories about him is that when he was 84 years old and divorced, he married a 15-year-old girl who was a tenant farmer on his land. And you keep hearing all these stories about how he fired a cannon full of glass and nails and horseshoes at the sheriff when a posse came to take her away. And one thing I found in my research is that he didn't actually do that. There's a famous letter allegedly written by the sheriff, but apparently that's a forgery. I found from my research that he threatened to do it, but he didn't actually do it.
So when did he die?
He died in 1903, July 22nd, 1903.
And then what happened to Whitehall from there?
Well, from that point on, the place was too large, really, for anyone to easily afford. And I don't think any of his children inherited, I think maybe they did inherit it, but they didn't really want it. So gradually it was leased out to tenant farmers for a number of decades until it was given to the state in 1968.
Okay. Being there so long, do you have any ghost stories, maybe?
A lot of the people who worked there had some creepy incidents, and also some of the tourists did. Very interesting whenever you get a crowd of people seeing something rather than just one person. Unfortunately, I never saw anything really good. I did hear some things that were kind of strange, and I would always check them out, too, to see if there was any rational, natural explanation for them. Most of the time there was, but there were a few things that still I find mystifying.
Because they do have ghost tours there, I think, now, going on now in October, correct? And isn't there a story, I'm trying to think of the story, is there supposed to be a lady that haunts there?
Well, people who have seen ghosts there or claim to have seen ghosts, generally they mention three. There's Clay himself, there's a woman who's veiled, and there's a young boy who's about 13, 14 years old or so.
I have actually never been out there.
It's pretty cool.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Brady, have you been out there?
I've been a couple times. Growing up in Richmond, attending the local elementary schools, we usually had at least one or two field trips out there.
Yeah, and actually they have a nice walking trail out there too, I think.
Yes, they do.
That's very nice.
Yeah, that wasn't there when I worked there. It's a fairly recent thing.
Yeah, it's actually a very nice property, and I would just encourage people to go out there and check it out, to tell you the truth. So, so you write your first book. Did you self-publish that?
No, all my books have been actually published through publishers rather than self-publishing.
So it's at Indiana Press, I think. Indiana University Press has published some.
They've done the last four.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then where did your interest in true crime come from?
Well, that was another thing that I always had a lifelong interest in, and I'm not really sure I could pinpoint how that started. But in a way, it's history, and I always liked history. So recent crimes don't interest me so much, but older ones do from decades ago. I like doing the research on them.
So now, do you just kind of look at cold cases mostly, or...
Some of the ones I write about are still unsolved, and some of them have been solved.
So let's talk a little bit about the folklore and ghostlore as well, because you've got books about offbeat Kentucky and more offbeat Kentucky, I think, too. And those are both books about just oddball Kentuckians, right?
Yeah, there were just so many.
And then you've got some ghostlore books out there about, Gothic. What did I say here? Now I'm going to have to look at my paper. I apologize for that.
No problem.
Strange tales of crime and murder, Gothic and strange true tales of the South. And you've got the Kentucky Book of the Dead also. Is that right? Is that
yes.
that title right? Which all kind of have to do with ghost and folklore. Mm-hmm. And Kentucky, I think, is kind of unique. I know that this stuff exists all over the United States. There's people who have haunted houses and that kind of thing, and historic sites. Gettysburg supposedly has, a bunch of ghosts and all kinds of stuff like that. But, I just feel like that Eastern Kentucky, in its roots, has some really unique folklore, ghost lore, cultural stories that I think have been handed down, and I think it kind of speaks back to the Scottish-Irish roots of the Eastern Kentucky region. So you've written books about creepy California and your latest one about New England, but kind of what do you find unique about Kentucky in terms of the folklore, the oddballs, the weird stories, the ghost lore?
I think a lot of it has to do with the pioneer outlook, because people tend to forget this, but at one time Kentucky was the farthest west state that there was, and there was certainly a lot of pioneer activity, legal and illegal, and I think that kind of individualistic outlook was handed down over the generations.
Well, and you get a lot of these stories, too, I think, that come out of the mountains, that serve purpose to keep people away.
Well, that's very possible, yes.
So who are a couple of oddball Kentuckians that kind of stood out to you in doing your research for some of these books?
Well, the idea behind the book came from Jim Porter, the Louisville Giant. He lived in the 1830s. He was, I'm trying to remember his height, almost 8 feet.
Wow.
If I remember correctly. I'm terrible at remembering details. I wanted to write a book about him, and I realized after doing research there just wasn't enough material to do a full-length book about him. And I started thinking, well, why not a book where every chapter is about a different strange character from Kentucky history?
It's really creative.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any, what's your scariest story that you've come across that's from Kentucky?
Well, kind of hard to choose one. Usually whenever I do true ghost stories, I play them up for chuckles and laughs. Rarely are they really, really scary. But I think there were a couple of incidents at Whitehall that were pretty creepy, which I have in the Kentucky Book of the Dead. Also, there's a house in Richmond. I promised I wouldn't give its exact location, but it's pretty close to Eastern's campus, where the story behind it was really quite unnerving.
Really? What is it?
Well, to put it really briefly, what made this story impressive to me, I spoke with the owner of the house and his wife, who owned it back in the 1980s. And a couple months after they moved in, he woke up and saw the figure of a woman standing by his bed. A woman in white with blonde hair. She was elderly. She was really frightening looking. Deep eyes, rings around the eyes, sunken jaws. She spoke in a very deep, man-like, hoarse voice, mostly unintelligible, but something about going to a funeral and looking for a picture. And what made it impressive to me was a couple months later, he was looking around in the attic and he found a painting of the woman. And I include a picture of the painting in the book. There's no two people in the world, I think, who quite looked like this.
Oh, my God.
And it was impressive to me because if he found the painting first, then he saw the ghost. You could always say, well, he saw the painting and he was frightened by it and it got at his subconscious and he had a nightmare and dreamed he saw this woman.
Yep.
But he saw the woman, then the painting, weeks and weeks later. In fact, his wife confirmed for me that he told her all about the ghost before he found the painting.
Wow.
So I thought that was pretty impressive.
That is pretty.
That's
scary. That is a good one. Now, is that in the Kentucky Book of the Dead?
Yes, it is. He and his son and his wife's father all saw it, and also a young man who had lived there with his family before the owner in the 80s moved in. He read a report in the Herald Leader about the ghost, and he called in and said, hey, I saw her too, and even gave a description of her, even though the Herald Leader's article didn't really describe her in much detail.
Interesting.
So again, I find that pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I know we don't want to give the location of the house or anything like that, but are the same people living in the house today?
No, they moved out. They
Really?
moved out in the late 90s, I think it was.
And is somebody else living in the house that you know of?
I think so. It was actually up for sale a few years ago, and I desperately wanted to buy it, but it was far out of my price range, which I'm still weeping about to this very day.
Have you talked to the people who bought it or currently live there?
No, I actually don't know who lives there now.
Okay. Well,
it'd be interesting to see if they see it now.
Yes, it absolutely would. So, wow, I have just completely blanked on where I was going to go. I'm going to go with this. That story just it scared me too much, right? So let's get into talking a little bit about your kind of research writing process? Because I think all writers have a different process that they go through. So kind of take us through when you come across a topic that you think you want to write about, kind of from beginning to end product book.
Okay. Well, for one thing, I'm on the autism scale. I have Asperger's syndrome, which makes me very obsessive, which is actually a plus if you're going to do research, because you enjoy spending hours and hours and hours and hours doing things that other normal people would rather not do. So for a number of years, I've had kind of a hobby where I go to the EKU library when I'm not teaching with a laptop, and I go to the microfilm machines, and I've been going through the Louisville Courier-Journal on microfilm, every single issue, keeping notes on stories that sound interesting. You can, as you go through it day by day, you see these stories unfolding, just like a novel. And sometimes years and years and years later, there will be extra material about it. And I write down the dates and the page numbers, and then later if I'm going to do a book, say, about New England, I just look for New England stories that sound like they're worth doing.
What do you like sitting, like, you said you came to the library and you sat down and looked up these old newspapers. Why not just Google it?
Well, people have asked me, why don't I use newspapers.com and things like that, and they are very useful, but I find I actually enjoy going through microfilm a lot better.
Okay.
Newspapers.com and Google are good if you already know the name of somebody you want to research. But with microfilm, it's this feast because you keep finding all these things you're not even looking for.
So it sounds like you just pick a date and start rolling.
Oh, I do. I started with 1877, kind of arbitrarily, and I worked my way up to 1939. So, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So do you just concentrate on like true crime sections or like police reports or the front page?
Oh,
or
just anything.
Just anything.
I go through a page. I even make notes on advertisements and things like that I think might actually come in handy someday later. And you never know. I got enough material probably for 20 more books out of it.
Wow.
Wow, that's really interesting. Now, I will say, as a former librarian, that microfiche and microfilm are very good mediums. They're probably the best preservation medium that's out there because if you keep them in the right conditions, they can last up to 100 years. And, with computers, internet, and that kind of technology stuff, that can actually go away fairly quickly. I mean, you can't even find a computer with a 3.5-inch floppy A drive on it anymore.
True.
Right?
Well, I really hope that the microfilm machines are never done away with. That's where I do nearly all my research.
Yeah,
and so much good stuff comes from it if you're patient and you're just willing to sit there and look through the daily issues.
And I absolutely totally agree with that. And I do agree also with your point in the fact that, if you're looking at newspapers.com or another internet site dealing with newspapers, A, they might not go back that far because not everything is digitized, surprisingly enough. And B, you can't just page. You kind of have to know what you're looking for in terms of that. Now, Brady, have you ever used a microfilm and or microfiche machine?
My millennial mind would blow up if I had to sit down there and just go through page after page after page. If I don't find it in like 10 seconds, I probably won't use it, or I'll get distracted with some other topic. Probably.
You might also get nauseous from it too, because that you got to crank it, and it goes by real fast.
Yeah, you get that seasick feeling.
Yes,
no doubt about it.
That can happen. But I personally have used it in the past, and I do think it's a really good medium. And that's interesting that you just sit there and go through. You don't necessarily have a topic in mind, but things jump out at you.
No, nothing really in particular in mind. I'm just looking for stories that sound good. One thing I'm rather pleased with, if you read most so-called true ghost stories, they're pretty vague. It's usually, my grandfather said he saw this, this, and this. But if you look at mine, I've always got names, I've got dates, I've got specific locations. Sometimes I'll go through the old census records to make sure these people actually existed.
So do you use any secondary sources or use strictly primary resources?
Sometimes I'll look through census records or Ancestry or newspapers.com. If you know what you're looking for, those are really, really useful. And I often use interlibrary loan to find small-town papers, because something like the Courier-Journal or the New York Times covering a regional story, you'll read enough to get interested in it, but they don't always do follow-up stories. And if you can get the date and the town, you can often get the local paper, and they always have lots more extra details.
Yeah, and a lot of those local papers also are not available online, especially going back as far as you're going back. So, you compile all the research. So what's your writing process?
Well, the writing process for me is, it sounds really, really simple, but once I know what I want to do, I just go to the library with a big bag of dimes and I copy out the newspaper articles and I take them back to my office and I try to write them up in a way that's factual yet entertaining. And I've never really had writer's block, and I think it's because I don't have any imagination, because all the things I need are right there in the newspaper accounts. I just have to find a way of writing them up so that they're interesting.
And I gotta say, you utilize EKU's library, correct, a lot.
Yes.
So we gotta give a shout out to them, because
definitely.
That's an absolutely great resource that we have on campus. Between obviously the microfiche and all of that, but the interlibrary loan resources.
Yeah, they have saved me many, many times. And just on a personal note, please, please, please don't throw out the microfilm machine. If you ever do, I will really be stuck. I will have absolutely no idea where to go from there.
Well, I think that, you may be able to, you would purchase it or,
Well, I would.
Take it to your house, right?
I don't know where I put it, but I would buy one if I could.
So, once you get the writing process done, about how long does that take from after you've got all your stuff compiled together, your research?
Oh, and before it's published?
Yeah.
Usually about a year, sometimes longer.
Are you a self-editor?
I do self-edit. I let my twin also read what I write, because he's an excellent proofreader, and he always sees things that I totally missed. And then, of course, the publishers themselves have their own editors.
Sure. Now, I want to kind of go back because I remembered the topic that I was going to get onto,
Okay.
right? Actually, have you ever thought about writing a book about EKU in terms of the folklore, ghostlore?
It's not a bad idea.
It is a good idea. And I actually, when I look through my old files, I do have some really odd little stories about Easter, and probably not enough to write a book all by itself, but I do have some things that I really do need to use sooner or later.
Well, do you have any examples that you could give us without exposing too much?
Not off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Because Brady, you know a couple of these a little bit.
Growing up in Richmond, you hear about the Blue Lady.
Oh, right.
And
right,
the Sullivan Ghost. So we have at least two that I know of. And then the Blue Lady is in King Johnson, and she's in, what's the auditorium?
Oh, Pearl Buchanan.
Yeah,
Theater.
Buchanan, yeah.
See,
So she haunts two places.
I know of her, but I don't know her story.
I think the story behind the Blue Lady is it was this theater major. She had been rehearsing a play that they had just come across, they came across the play oddly, and the girl was the lead. And in the play, the lead female ends up killing herself, hanging herself. And she was really into the role, and everybody was getting annoyed with her, so everybody left, and she stayed in Pearl Buchanan by herself. The next day, they find her hanging in the bell tower of King Johnson. Whether this is true or not, it makes for a good story, and it's kind of scary. And then people say they've seen this lady dressed in blue in King Johnson and Pearl Buchanan haunting them still to this day, apparently.
All right. Yeah, I have not heard the whole story. I knew the Blue Lady thing. But again, that's one of those stories that just gets kind of passed down through the whole campus kind of culture and freshman orientation and that kind of thing. And I'm sure it's probably been added to over the years.
It probably has. I always try to look for the original, where these stories began or originated from.
Is that difficult?
Sometimes. Usually it happens just completely by accident. And, for example, I was actually intending to hopefully find where the Pearl Buchanan story came from, just going through the Louisville Courier journals, but I never did find any incident that actually would have been the starting point of the story.
Would have absolutely verified it.
I wish I had, but I just couldn't find it. Of course, a lot of times things like that didn't really make the papers.
Right. And see, it's interesting to kind of talk about that also in the fact of kind of modern day culture, right? Mm-hmm. Just because a lot of the stuff that you're writing about from, 19th century, early 20th century was, diminished down through stories on campus and whatever. But now what do we have? We have the internet, right? And it's kind of like the modern day with Reddit and that kind of thing that kind of spread virally these same kind of stories. It's like they never go away.
Exactly.
That's true.
So we have a house here on campus. Well, it's like across the street from campus, but EKU does own the property, called Elmwood. Have you ever researched Elmwood or thought about doing anything on Elmwood?
Not yet, but I would really, really love to.
Because it's definitely an interesting property.
Mm-hmm. Oh, back in the summer, a couple months ago, they had an open house there. And I used to live in a house behind Elmwood, a street behind it, and I would always see it through the trees and think, boy, I would really love to see what that place looks like inside. And I finally got to.
And what did you think of it?
Oh, it was just mind-boggling. I don't know if there are any ghost stories about it, but nobody's lived in the place in so long.
Since the 70s, I think. Yeah. Because the story that I know on it, kind of the history background, Brady, do you know any of the background on it?
I don't know too much about Elmwood, actually.
There was a gentleman from Texas that I guess was going to get arrested for cattle wrestling or something like that, and he came to Richmond and he built this house. And I think he had like 2 daughters or something. And the one daughter that was living in it never got married, and then she died in the 70s. And then the property was in a dispute with her and EKU, and that's a whole other issue there. But I think that's the kind of short version that I know about the property.
Yeah, that's the story that I'd always heard too.
Yeah, but I think it would make definitely an interesting book.
Well, it would make a great story, yeah, in any case.
Because it's a spooky house.
It is.
It's kind of scary.
I think any house like that, really, we have Whitehall and Elmwood. I think any house that's big and old, you just kind of think haunted.
Yeah, haunted house. So, do you have any advice for anybody who is thinking about getting into writing or wants to start writing or...
Well, sometimes people ask me, and I always have to say, well, if you're talking about fiction or poetry, I'm afraid I have no idea, because I just can't write that myself, and I don't know how to publish something like that. If they're going to do factual things like biographies or histories, I probably could have some advice for them. And sometimes I tell people, if you could do a factually based thing and get it published, then that might be the springboard from which you can publish fiction. Because once you have something in print, it seems like it's easier to get other things out.
Have you ever thought about historical fiction? I'm a big fan of historical fiction.
I would like to try that. I think having read all those newspapers for years that I've absorbed enough details about various periods in history that I might be able to convincingly recreate an era. Still, I don't know that I could do any good with dialogue or characterization or anything like that.
Because I'm telling you, true crime is huge right now. Absolutely huge. There's a bunch of true crime podcasts out there, and people absolutely love those true crime stories.
Yes, they do.
For sure. So I think we're going to get into a little Colonel Quickfire here. It's a portion of our program. And this is a really should be easy, fun. We haven't stumped anybody yet.
Okay.
And, you can give one-word answer, you can give a sentence answer, you can give a paragraph answer. It does not matter to us. You can go on as long as you want on these questions, but we go back and forth. So I do one, then Brady does one, then I do one, and so on. So are you ready?
Okay, I'll try.
Okay. I will start out. So is there a subject that you haven't written about that you want to?
Nothing off the top of my head, actually. I've done so many books, and each one contains at least a few dozen stories. Some of them have hundreds of stories. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Well, after a certain era, I usually don't write about things that happened after about 1940 or so, or very seldom, simply because they're living relatives and I don't want to anger anybody.
Okay. Let's see.
I don't really know if that answered your question.
Hey,
but
you're
there
fine.
it is.
Good.
You're good.
What is your favorite place that you've either researched or been to in the United States?
Oh, I really like Whitehall. Now, I have some prejudice in the matter because I worked there, but it really has a special place in my heart. I love Mammoth Cave, too, but I've never written anything about Mammoth Cave.
That's got some ghost stories and ghost lore.
Yes, it does.
It
Well,
does.
I've written a little about Floyd Collins, who I don't know if anyone is aware of the story, but he was a cave explorer, not in Mammoth Cave, but near Mammoth Cave in 1925, and a rock fell while he was exploring on his own, and it pinned his leg down, and he was trapped. And he was really the center of attention in the whole world for a few days through the rescue efforts, which unfortunately ended up not succeeding.
Yeah, I've heard like various, Native American stories down there about hauntings and stuff like that. But I hadn't heard that story. That's interesting. So he didn't do a what was that? 8 days later.
147 hours.
147. 8
Yeah.
days later is a zombie movie. Ignore me on that. Yeah, where the guy gets his arm trapped in the rock and has to cut it off with the pocket knife. I've never seen it.
I've seen bits, but
There you go. That's very interesting. So let's see. What's one weird place in Kentucky that everybody needs to visit?
Probably Waverly Hills Sanitarium. Or is it a sanatorium?
It's a
I never remember. It's not the same thing.
No,
I think
it's
a
not.
sanitarium.
Is it? Oh my gosh! Now I can't believe it. I think it is a sanitarium because
I
a
think it's a sanitarium.
sanatorium is where people, when they had the tuberculosis and that kind of thing, went. That's a sanitarium for
I
the
think so.
mentally
Yes,
insane.
yes.
Have you ever been there?
I've been there twice, and I don't know if it's haunted, but I have to say it's the most disturbing place I've ever been in my life. It's exactly like something out of a nightmare.
really.
This huge, enormous abandoned hospital.
Wow.
I've never been there, but I've always wanted to go.
I've always heard stories
Yeah,
about it, too.
I'm a huge fan of abandoned places. I love abandoned places. Fascinated with abandoned places.
It would be nice to go, though, with only a few people, because usually when you go, there are a couple hundred people there. And I keep thinking if there is anything there, it's not going to be active with 200 people walking around. If you
That's
just had
true.
about 5 people, that might be different.
It's hard to be scared when you have 100 people around you.
Right, and you hear a strange noise, and who knows where it came
Exactly.
from.
Now, did you go in the day or did you go at night?
At night.
Okay.
I think you have to pay extra for a day tour, a private tour. So one of these days.
All right, let's bring it back a little bit local. What's your favorite place to eat here in Richmond?
Oh, there are so many. Berea's a nice town, but there just aren't that many good places to eat.
If you were going,
Now I'm stumped.
If you were going,
because there are so many of them.
if you were going to go out, where would you go?
Oh, that whole area with Olive Garden and the steakhouse and Kodo's. I love Kodo.
Kodo's is good.
Let's say Kodo.
Okay.
All right, we got that. All right, I actually got 4 questions, so you get bonus questions. Other than you, okay, with the true crime stuff, right? Other than you, who is one true crime author that people should read?
Oh, Harold Schechter. Harold Schechter is great.
And what's he written? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with
Harold
him.
Schechter is he's a professor of English in New York City, and I cannot, off the top of my head, remember which university he works at, but he's written books on Ed Gein and Albert Fish and people like that.
Very scary,
H.H. Holmes.
real life people.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really top quality true crime books.
Okay. I've only got one more, so as somebody who has a master's degree from Eastern and has been from Richmond and teaches here and even all around our different areas that we have, what do you think it means to be a colonel?
Well, that is an extremely good question, and that would be a really hard one to answer briefly. There just seems to be, a certain pride to it. You keep hearing Colonel Pride, and I think there really is something to that. I notice that people who graduate from Eastern are just so pleased to tell people that they did. again, we have so many families passing down the legacy of going to Eastern to their children.
Yeah,
And why would they do that?
Right.
Unless they were very proud of being here.
And I think you're exactly right. Yeah, there's a pride factor in that whole thing. Yeah.
Very true.
I like that answer.
Well, thank
All
you.
right.
That might
So,
have been our best one.
last question. What is your favorite place on campus?
My office or the library microfilm.
I like that answer.
Yeah. I spend a lot of time by myself.
So where's your office located?
It's in Maddox.
Okay. All right. But yeah, the library microfilm room, I like that answer. Do you get out to the Ravine at all?
Not very often. Just on my way to the Jones Coates buildings.
So I think he's one of 2 people that have ever not said the Ravine.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. I believe Dr. Sheila Presley said Keene Johnson ballroom
Oh,
area.
that's
That
a
is
great
pretty.
place
Yeah.
to be, too.
And then you've said the library microfiche.
Yep.
But everybody else, I think, with that question has said the Ravine. But I like that answer a lot.
Thank you.
A lot. So people can find your books on Amazon, correct?
Yes, they're at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and, of course, the publishers' websites. So, there's been several publishers. Turner Publishing, Pelican Publishing, McClanahan Press, Arcadia, Jesse Stewart.
And they can
did
probably
one.
get them at their local library.
Oh, yes, they can.
Yeah, or through interlibrary loan.
And,
Yeah.
Indiana University Press. did the
But
last
Cassius
two.
Clay, the Cassius Clay book is out of print. Is that correct?
It's the only one, as far as I know, that's now out of print. It was the very first book.
Okay.
But you can get it as an ebook, I find.
Okay.
And you've got a website.
I do. If you want to look, it's kevinmcqueenstories.com. And I always tell people, remember, my name is spelled Keven.
Yes, it's KevenMcQueen stories.com.
And I have a Facebook author page.
Yeah, so everybody needs to go check out Kevin's books. He's got a lot of them, and they all look really interesting.
They all do.
Yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
absolutely. Well, we appreciate you coming in, for sure. Brady, this has been a fun conversation.
Oh, it has.
Always. But no, now we're in October, and so I love this ghost stuff.
We
Love
kicked it off right.
Absolutely.
Spooky season is underway.
Yes, we did. And of course, Morgan and Emily, thank you, ladies. We sound beautiful in my headphones. Sound great. And of course, you can find current and past episodes of EKU Voices on our webpage at alumni.eku.edu/voices. Follow us on Twitter at EKU Voices and follow EKU Development and Alumni Relations on all the social media platforms. And of course, subscribe to EKU Voices on iTunes to receive the newest conversations with Eastern Kentucky University's alumni and friends. So until next time, I'm Carrie Lewis.
And I'm Brady McBride.
And go
Big
Big E.